Alrighty. Chapter 5, The Toy Campaign. Book 2 of the Spirit Flyer series. Book 1 was The Magic Bicycle. Wait a minute here. Yeah, this is Chapter 5. Oh, crud. Thought I read this last night. Maybe I did. Oh. Yeah, okay, Chapter 6. Sorry about that. I'll change it later. Barry's riding to the dump to check on the toys there. Barry tells John. Susan Kramer was working in the garage the morning when John walked in. That morning when John walked in, the big garage door was open, but neither child noticed Barry Smedlow ride up and hide behind a tree down the block. I'm going to the toy store, John said to Susan. She was leaning over the lawnmower, checking the oil. Susan got an oil can from a garage shelf, then returned to the mower. Susan was still determined not to speak to John, though she had decided a week of silence would be more practical than forever. She poured the thick oil into the lawnmower as if she hadn't heard John. I want to check on the trash container again, John said. I think you should come with me, maybe. Susan snorted, then shook her head. She couldn't believe that John had the nerve to ask such a thing. She was tempted to break her silence and tell him what she really thought, but she stubbornly pursed her lips. Be that way then, John complained. He looked at his Spirit Flyer. Seeing the flat tires again just added to his anger. He had tried to pump them up earlier, but all the air leaked out. Deep inside, he figured the bike probably wouldn't work, even if he could get the tires pumped up. From past experience, he knew the mysterious old red bicycle had a mind of its own. For a moment, John considered apologizing to Susan and trying to make things right, but then the thought of how much trouble that he would be in made him stop. If my plan works, I can avoid the trouble and still come out ahead, John thought to himself, but John wasn't sure his plan would work. He wasn't sure of anything, and that was the problem. Nothing had been quite right since he had disobeyed his grandfather's instructions on hooking up the gear lever. He hadn't told his family where he had gone the 3 hours he had disappeared because he was afraid he had made a big mistake on his journey. John knew that when he had flipped the gear lever, he had shot forward in time somewhere in the deeper world. On the trip, John had gone to the most exciting place he had ever seen. The old bike had crash-landed right at the foot of a mountain of gleaming toys. Shooting stars had exploded all around him in beautiful colors like fireworks. John had soon realized that the place was high in the air, halfway between the earth and the heavens, directly over Centerville. He had also realized the exploding lights were a display of real fireworks. John had reached greedily for the first toy when he noticed a chain around his neck. That had been a shock, but what had been more surprising was the ghostly image of a boy that held the other end of the chain. The boy looked just like John himself. The ghostly boy had been friendly at first. He had promised that John could have the whole mountain of toys if John did one simple thing: not put any of the accessories like the gear lever or the light or the horn or the generator on the Spirit Flyer bicycle. John had resisted at first, but the more the boy talked, the more he had seemed to make sense. He could still keep the bike, John had reasoned with himself, and he would gain a fortune in toys and fun. John had figured that would be more than enough to make up for a bunch of old bicycle instruments, even if they were magic. So John had agreed to the deal, but as he picked up the first toy, they all disappeared in a puff and ashes. Then the ghostly boy reminded John that the deal would take place in the future, near the 4th of July. In the meantime, John had to prove he was serious about keeping his end of the deal, the bargain. John began to protest, feeling cheated. That's when things got worse. With the glittering toys gone, John had gotten a better look at his surroundings. John didn't even like to think about what had happened after that. It felt like he had been trapped in a nightmare, but at the worst moment, he suddenly found himself back home. 3 hours had passed in the real world while he had been in the deeper world. John had felt ashamed and troubled for weeks, but since he had kept his end of the deal, he still figured he would be collecting the toys any day since the 4th of July was so close. In fact, when he had gone through the black window behind the toy store, he had seen the toys again. John had been sure that he was finally going to get the toys since he had kept his end of the agreement, but the toys had disappeared again as he picked up the first one. Then John popped through the window again, ending up by the dump. John figured it still wasn't the right time. but he was also beginning to have more and more doubts about the deal he had made. He felt torn in two. Part of him wanted to just stop and confess the whole story to his family. That the other part of him still hoped to collect the toys. He wanted to go back to the toy store in hopes of finding the come on. Why can't we do this right? I don't know. He wanted to go back to the toy store in hopes of finding the black window again. At the same time, he was afraid of what might happen. He had seen something awful in the deeper world both times, and then he had even seen it at the dump just for a moment. That's why John wanted Susan to come along just in case there was trouble. But she wasn't speaking to him. He didn't blame her since he had lied the way he had. Still, he was afraid. He wasn't ready to admit to Susan that he might have made several mistakes, so without another word, he strode out of the garage toward town. His Spirit Flyer leaned silently against the wall, the two big tires flat as a board. Susan watched John head down the street. She had been set to go to mow and then trim the Smithers lawn by herself when she had seen Barry Smedlow slowly riding down the street. At first she hadn't thought anything of it, but when Barry had pulled behind a tree suddenly, as if hiding, Susan had gotten suspicious. John had just left for the toy store and was 2 blocks ahead of the bigger boy. When John had stopped at the corner, Barry had stopped. When John had continued walking again, Barry had followed. Susan had watched John and Barry until they were out of sight. Who cares, Susan muttered to herself. John can take care of himself. Though she was still feeding off her anger, she felt sad. Deep inside, she really loved John very much. As Susan got the clipper in the burlap grass bag, she began to worry. She didn't think Barry would be brave enough to do anything by himself, but if he had his club, he might try to gang up on John. Susan kept working. She went inside to take her mother some chamomile tea. Mrs. Kramer was reading in bed. Her face was pale. Susan kissed her on the forehead and went back into the garage. As she was about to drag the lawnmower over to the Smithers, she heard a small horn just like the noise she had heard the day before. Susan cocked her head, listening carefully. Hey, Upton. She looked up and down the street. Then she looked in the garage. The girl's eyes rested on her old red Spirit Flyer. Susan forgot about the sound of the horn when she saw the flat tires. The tires looked so pathetic when they were flat. Susan dragged the mower back inside the garage. Then she got an air pump off the shelf and took it to the front of the old red bike. She pumped up the front tire and then the back. Maybe I should check on John just to make sure he's not in any trouble, she said to herself as she put the pump away. In a moment she was rolling down the street toward the center of town. As John walked, he felt worse than ever. He was so deep in his thoughts that he didn't notice Barry Smedlow carefully following at a distance. When he got to Main Street, he turned toward the toy store as if pulled by some invisible force. He was surprised to see a large truck and trailer parked in front of the toy store. A ramp led up to the back of the trailer, which was filled with cardboard boxes. Men in gray uniforms were pulling the boxes on little handcarts, but he was even more surprised to see Susan waiting for him. "What are you doing here?" he asked as he walked up to the store. She wanted to help John, but she was still determined not to speak to him, so she gestured behind John with a nod of her head. Half a block away, John saw Barry duck into a doorway as soon as Barry knew he was spotted. What dirty business the Cobra Club may be doing. Why is this truck here? Are they bringing some new toys? But as the children watched, it became clear that the men were loading the truck, taking toys away. John and Susan walked up to the front door. A man pushed by him, rolling another big box to the truck. An old woman with gray hair, with a big ball of black yarn was in her lap. "Hi," John said, stepping through the doorway. "Where's Mr. Potter?" "He's gone," the woman said. "I'm Mrs. Happy, the new owner of this delightful toy store. How can I help you?" "I just came to look around," John said. He stared at you. "There's not much to see," Mrs. Happy replied. "Everything's a mess because I'm not really open yet. I have a lot of new toys coming in, but they haven't arrived. In the meantime, I'm clearing out the old toys for processing. When the new toys come in, I'm going to have a grand opening day celebration this Friday on July 4th. There'll be lots of free toys for all children in town. I hope you'll come." "I'm sure I'll be there. I'll sure be there if there's free toys," John said and smiled eagerly. "I know you will," the woman replied. Just then, a black crow fluttered across the room from the cash register and landed on Mrs. Happy's shoulder. The little black eyes stared at John. "How can you afford to give away toys?" Susan asked, finally breaking her silence. "A new store has to attract new customers," Mrs. Happy said a little too sweetly. "Seems like a pretty expensive way to get business," Susan said. Somehow Susan knew that there was more to Mrs. Happy's plans than what she was saying. Some children know how to mind their own business, Mrs. Happy said harshly. Then suddenly, changing back to her sweet voice, she said, I just want to create goodwill with the town of Centerville in the hopes of establishing a long and friendly relationship. Hello, the crow said in a squeaky voice. The bird pecked at some string in the old woman's hair, then looked back at the two children. The crow on her shoulder with her needle, knitting a chain, I think. He talks? John asked. I've never seen a talking crow. What's its name? I call him Nail, Mrs. Happy said. He's a fine bird, though rather careless at times. Will you be selling pets when you reopen? John asked. Oh, my, no, Mrs. Happy said and laughed. Nail is just my little purr. I'd ask you to stay, but as you can see, there isn't much to look at. Out with the old and in with the new, that's what I say. Out with the old, in with the new, the crow repeated. Out with the old, in with the new. Out with the old, out with you, it said. Susan frowned at the crow's odd rhyme. John walked over to an aisle that had held softballs and other sports equipment. Most of the shelves were empty. Another big box rolled out the door. Mrs. Happy looked out the front window at the sidewalk. Most children I've seen are riding bicycles these days, Mrs. Happy said to John. Are you in need of a good bicycle? No, not really. My bike has a couple of flat tires right now. Is that so? Mrs. Happy asked. I may have some bicycles coming one of these days, some really special ones. It just depends how well the new line of toys does. They're new and improved, you know. Sure to come to our grand opening day celebration. This Friday is the target date. I want everyone to come. Everything will be extra super wonderful. Besides new and improved. New and improved, extra special, wonderful, yeah. And don't miss the fireworks we'll be sponsoring. I'll be there for sure, John said. We just got 3 more boxes to go on the truck, the worker said to Miss Happy. He handed her a piece of paper. I better go now, John said. Goodbye, my boy, the old woman said, and Susan started to leave, too, she added. As Susan started to leave, too, she added, You'll come for the free toys, too, won't you? I'm not sure, Susan said uncomfortably. There was something she definitely did not trust about the woman, or her plan to give away toys. It all sounded too easy. Susan followed John down the street toward the square, still upset with John, but still concerned about him, too. He turned and waited for Susan to catch up, and then he kept walking. While Susan kept pace on her Spirit Flyer. Isn't that great about the grand opening celebration and getting free toys? John asked. That's the best news I've heard in a long time. Susan remained silent. She couldn't believe that all he had on his mind was toys. Okay, be that way, John said when he didn't answer. But at least you could have been nicer to Mrs. Happy. What do you have against someone who's going to give away 3 toys? As they rounded the corner, John saw the alley and remembered wanting to look for the black window. He stared at the big trash bin behind the toy store. His feet seemed to have a mind of their own as he moved down the alley. After what had happened before, Susan couldn't believe he was going back to the trash bin. But then she saw the vacant look in his eyes and heard a horn sound from somewhere. She looked around to find out where the sound was coming from, but saw nothing. By the time she focused her attention on John, he was behind the toy store. John's heart jumped when he saw the shiny dark window leaning against the side of the trash bin. He reached out slowly, tapped the darkness with his finger as if bidding it to open. In an instant, the unspoken wish was granted, and the window was alive with moving, blurred images. John opened his mouth in surprise. He tried to step backward, but his feet seemed stuck. He forgot about his feet, however, when the window began to focus on the depths of the world it contained. Through a window, he saw a huge mountain of glimmering, shiny new toys. Toys, toys, and more toys were everywhere. Trains and dolls and balls and bats and cars and airplanes and a zillion other things that were made for fun, all piled on top of each other. John stared as if in a trance. Behind the mountain of toys, a dim blue light glowed on the horizon. John licked his lips in wonder and fascination at such a treasure just beyond his grasp, and suddenly over the top of this huge mountain of toys came a boy. The boy jumped down in leaping bounds and flying steps until he bounced right up to the edge of the window. John was looking at a dark reflection of himself. The boy on the other side of the window smiled. It's here, it's all here, the John on the other side of the window whispered. Come back to us, it's your reward, you deserve it. Treasure galore, come and get it, and I'll show you how. The boy then turned and ran away. A surge of excitement filled John. This seemed to be the same place he had gone when he had disappeared. But then John noticed a long chain trailing behind the wishful boy, who was bounding back up the mountain of toys inside the window. The boy disappeared over the top of the toy mountain, and the long dark chain stretched tighter and tighter. That's when John felt the dark chain pulled forward. He jerked back, struggling to keep his balance, but the dark chain came right out of the window and was stretched tight around his neck as if it had been there all along. Susan watched the scene with stunned disbelief. Though she couldn't see the chain, she knew something was wrong. She began moving toward John on her bike, but it was too late. John struggled. But the harder he pulled, the more he felt pulled back, as if he were pulling himself. "John, wait," Susan yelled. John turned his head to see Susan. The power of the chain was too much. John reached out to brace himself against the dark window. But the instant his hand touched the darkness this time, he was sucked through into the world beyond the window. Into the world beyond the window. "John," Susan screamed. She skidded to a halt in front of the dark window. Just beyond the surface, she saw two Johns. One seemed to be struggling with the other. A distant barren hill loomed in the background. A distant barren hill loomed in the background, in front of an eerie blue light. "John, John, come back," Susan called. The two boys faded into the darkness as the window went blank. Susan felt the fear welling up inside of her. She gripped the handlebars of her Spirit Flyer tighter. She stared at the black window and leaned closer. She knew better than to touch it. Just then, her own reflection came into focus out of the shiny darkness. Only this time, this wasn't a true reflection, but a picture of Susan. The Susan in the window wasn't on a bike. "If you don't want to play, go away," the Susan inside the window sneered. "I've got your number. I'll get you soon enough." Susan screamed as she rolled backward on her bicycle. The reflection in the window just began to laugh. Just then a horn blew, snapping the hold of fear that had gripped the girl. She cocked her head and looked both ways up and down the alley, trying to see where the sound had come from. That's when she saw Barry Smedlow step from behind a small wooden shack just 30 feet away. "I saw the whole thing," Barry said in a nervous, shaking voice. Then he frowned, staring at the black window. "I want to know where your brother went and what kind of game you Kramers are playing. What are you hiding? Tell me right now or I'll blast you." Barry pulled out a slingshot from behind his back. Susan turned her bicycle to face him. "I'm not sure what's going on," Susan said truthfully, staring at the slingshot. She was so confused and bewildered at the moment, she hardly felt afraid of Barry's threat. As he loaded a rock, the old red Spirit Flyer suddenly leaped forward toward Barry. The pedals began turning by themselves as the bike quickly picked up speed. Susan lost her balance for an instant. Instinctively, she leaned forward to get a better grip on the handlebars. Barry yelped when he saw Susan charging straight at him. He dropped the slingshot and rock and started running down the alley, but the Spirit Flyer was gaining speed. The big balloon tires ate up the pavement behind the boys' fleeing steps. Barry looked over his shoulder, and his eyes went wide with fear as the big red bike brushed against his heels. "Look out, you crazy!" Barry yelled and dove for the pavement as the old red bicycle lifted into the air. The big tires of the Spirit Flyer zoomed over the boy's head, missing him by inches. Barry thought Susan had somehow jumped the bike, but when he looked up, he was amazed to see the old red bike climbing higher into the air. The bike was as high as the roof of the hardware store and going higher, when all of a sudden there was a humming sound, and then right before his eyes, the Spirit Flyer disappeared into thin air. Ants that bite, I don't like them. Okay, so that's chapter 6. Sorry about that. Yeah. Chapter 6. All right. Well, good night. 2 people. Good night, guys. God bless all. No word of any changes here. Moseying along. Muttering along, whatever you want to call it. Oi. Oi, get yatin. Oi. Hello, guys. All right, good night. God bless.